Hi and welcome to the final presentation of the ACT course that I did at the Royal National Hospital for Rheumatic Diseases in Bath. We're going to look at the final two values that we didn't cover in the last video, so go back and have a look if you haven't seen those yet. And just a few final thoughts on use of the concept in practice. So just as a starting point, we're going to go back to looking at the Hexaflex, the theoretical model that underpins the acceptance and commitment therapy principles. It's worth remembering that psychological flexibility is the ultimate goal. This is an individual's ability to respond to a situation in a greater number of chosen ways rather than a habit that has become ingrained, or a single or a small number of inflexible responses to a problem. So if somebody's placed under stress and their previous response has always been to get angry or to lose their temper with somebody, that they have different ways that they can respond to it, that they can see the other side of the argument, that perhaps they're able to change the way that they respond to that situation. So today we're looking at values and committed action. So previously we looked at the other four, which are sort of loosely tied to mindfulness and awareness of the present moment, whereas the other two aspects are more about looking at things that we can do to work towards things that are important to us as individuals. And this is part of ACT because if we are responding in an inflexible way from a psychological perspective, very often we are not working towards things that are important to us. So if you are wanting to, say, for example, be a supportive parent, if every time you're placed under stress when working with your child that you become angry, you may not be working towards that value. And committed action is ways in which you can start to try and behave more in those ways, and is an important part of attaining psychological flexibility. So firstly, onto the difficult subject of values. So these are things that, let's have a look at what they are, shall we? So values are very important to us. They are things like being athletic, being kind, being a good parent, being punctual, and are aspects of our character or the character of others. They are intangible, and going through the list that I've just been through, kind and athletic or supportive, these are fairly intangible concepts and are subjective in what they mean. It's possible to describe or to consider yourself or somebody else as having these attributes, but it's not something you can definitely objectively ever fully achieve. They are ultimately directions of travel. So if you want to work or be a charitable person, then there may be a lot of things that you get involved with to become more charitable, giving money or your time to worthy causes, and as such they may inform goals. So you might set yourself targets to help you work towards a value. Now, very often people will talk about things that are important to them that maybe they're struggling to achieve through persistent pain. So they might talk about them not being as active as they once were, and that might be their value. The goals along the way to help them return or help them feel that they're working towards this value are important, but particularly as they're more tangible and give us a direction of travel, and are the things that link values with committed action, which is what we'll look at a little later. Values are not goals in themselves. So values are what inform a goal. They're not emotions or feelings. They should be more consistent or persistent than this. There's an important distinction between morals or ethics and values. Morals or ethics are important features that are placed on us by society or by others as to what a good way to behave is. Values may share some of the same features as morals and ethics, and it might be seen as being moral or ethical to behave in certain ways that are in keeping with values, but it's not. But a value is not to say to conform to other elements of society. They are different from wants and needs. Was what was said in the course, but I think that's debate that wants are debatably very similar. Needs are not considered to be the same, as these are things that we, from a biological or have a desire to attain. So how do we try and help people think about their values? This is often quite challenging, and often are conversations of which not to enter into lightly. So one of the ways to maybe make it a little less invasive or obtrusive is to ask somebody to describe the people that they admire and the qualities that they have, because this, by reflection, will give you an idea of the sorts of qualities that individual value. Somebody's not going to say, for example, that they think that for example, being a kind and supportive person like Fireman Sam is important if they themselves don't consider that to be of importance. If you're feeling a bit more that you're able to discuss this more clearly with somebody, you might even say, what are the things that are important to you, or how you think you would like others to view you. It's a bit like working from a CBT perspective and getting people to be more aware of thoughts by helping them be a little bit more aware of their values. It can then start a conversation about, are you acting in a way that is consistent with that, and if not, are there ways that you can say that you would like to change to do so. So if somebody is keen to be a supportive parent, but their persistent pain is making this very challenging for them, it then starts to open up a conversation about how this can start to change, and to get people to look at that they do have a flexible way to respond to the situation of chronic pain that may allow them to be more in keeping with their values. Now, there are a few features that may make it very difficult for somebody to be in keeping with their values if they have persistent pain. So a perfectly normal coping strategy when in pain is avoidance. If we have a painful joint or limb, we avoid using it, and if this is short-term pain, then this might be a protective measure or to allow the normal healing processes to take place. However, if pain becomes persistent or chronic, this helpful response can sometimes become less helpful, in that if constantly avoiding activity actually ultimately makes somebody weaker and stiffer and less confident in doing so. And it might be that somebody constantly shies away from their values, and as a result of that finds it ultimately harder to engage with them in the future. If somebody, for example, has a value of being a social person, but they are often embarrassed or not keen to be around their friends because of how their pain affects them, then they're going to withdraw, and as a result it might be that they get out of the habit of going out, they lose contact and touch, and it's a bit of a vicious cycle. Another problem that might prevent somebody moving towards their values is a concept called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is a psychological principle that means that if people have met with failure in the past and this failure has been repeated, that they can start to see things being outside of their sphere of control, and as a result they cannot do anything about their situation, or they feel that's the feeling they have anyway. So, for example, if somebody has tried time and time again to become physically more active but has failed in this process, they may say, well, I just can't do this. This isn't something which is feasible for me to achieve. In some situations this is correct, but in many cases there are ways to work around these sorts of situations. Thirdly, people's values do change, and it might be that they no longer hold values they previously held as important, or it might be that they see themselves as not an individual who should hold these values. Somebody who walks with a stick might think it ridiculous that they can consider themselves to be athletic. However, the examples such as the Paralympic Games demonstrate that individuals who have physical disability can still achieve athletic success. Or similarly, that somebody that struggles to get out of the house cannot be a good parent to a child. But actually we know that this is not the case, and I'm sure you've come across many individuals with limitations who provide their children with a lot of support and fulfill that role very well. But these are worth bearing in mind when working with individuals on values. It's not easy. Now moving on to committed action. Committed action is, well, if you break it down to two halves, the committed element suggests that it is something that continually we work towards and needs to be an ongoing and developmental process. That if you find that you cannot achieve it or you struggle, that this is okay and this is important, that it's still valuable to keep continuing. Action suggests that it's anything. It's any form of activity, behavior, or anything else that works towards your targets. So it can be from exercise to making social engagements to doing activities that have not been done for a while, or spending time with people that you've maybe not seen for some time. They are often working towards your values, or they should be working towards your values and doing so in a practical way. It's important to look at the things that help you constantly adhere to these actions. So trying to take away barriers or things that make it difficult. Again, like values, it is a process, not an outcome. That it's something you continue to do to work towards your values, and it's never something you fully achieve. As it says at the bottom, it's not the same as goals, it's the process of working towards goals. And we've worked with this with individuals, I'm sure, but very often they feel a bit like this lady here in this slide, that they can't, that they have tried and tried and they keep having to pick themselves back up and they get tired of it. And this goes back to the learned helplessness I was talking about before. But it is important that we continue to support these people and reassure them and try and help them to continue to persist. It's important to recognise how difficult it is to constantly fight something or work against something that is persistent. But unfortunately, in persistent pain, this is the challenge that we are faced with. And we are part of the team or part of the group that support an individual. It might be that we help them see their own support network outside of ourselves, that they can identify friends or family that can support them and help them, or motivation outside of another individual. But it's important to have a realistic expectation that this is difficult to maintain. This is difficult. ACT has never proposed to be a straightforward or easy thing to do, but it is a worthwhile approach to a problem that allows us to move forward in keeping with our values in a way that allows us to respond in the way that we choose. We're kind of coming towards the end now, and with some final thoughts on ACT. I think the most important thing is that ACT is not a thing you do. It's not a set of exercises or practices. It's the way in which you do what you already do. So it's perfectly possible to give a set of exercises in an ACT way. An ACT set of exercises, or exercises following the concept of ACT, would be working towards individuals' values. They'd be looking at how you can continue to do these things. So if somebody's value was to be able to be walking in the hill, was to be active in the countryside, probably a better way of saying it, then you might start to get somebody walking as their committed action. You might ask them how they are thinking and feeling at the time of when they're walking, when the pain strikes, and you might get them to try and recognise the thoughts that come along with it and to be able to diffuse from them. You might try and encourage them to be more present in the moment so that they are able to respond to that onset of pain or worry about pain as it comes. It might be that you help them recognize that they are still the individual that they hold themselves to be, but that the self we have is one that we create and one we attribute to ourselves. There is a number of different metaphors that can help people be aware of the concepts that we've talked through ACT. But it's about being creative within that and talking within the language that makes sense. And it's important to remember that the interpretation I've given of ACT is not the only one, but it all goes back to that framework, the hexaflex, the different elements that make up ACT. And it's one of the key things that I learned on this course is that you don't have to be trying to apply all of these at once. In fact, if you're struggling or find it difficult to encourage an individual to work with one element of ACT, so say, for example, contact with the present moment, that you might go back and look at a different one. You might go and look at values to help them move forward. But ultimately, the goal is psychological flexibility. Really don't hold these presentations to be standalone or to be the final word on this concept. So I really would encourage you to have a look at any of the links that are on this page. So either searching for contextual science which is the scientific background and research that is done around ACT. There is also a book produced by a Australian GP, Dr. Russ Harris, a number of books actually, The Happiness Trap and various others, which is a good illustration of ACT. And also there is various other resources out there, and there's links associated with this on the description of this YouTube video, so have a look around, please. So finally, any questions, please pop them on a postcard or email to myself through my PMS email account. My name is Tom Shelton. Or if you want to, there is always Google. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I hope this has been useful. Have a nice day. Bye.